And a lot of times people will go into a business and they feel like they have to have all the answers and they can never be wrong. But if I could rewind time, I would probably add a little dose of humility to those first few years and even now, so that my learning curve was a little steeper.
Welcome to San Juan, Allan.
Hey, pleasure.
Good to have you down here. You know, you remind me of that old Living Color skit. What was it called? Yeah, man. I've got 15 jobs, man.
Are you a lawyer?
Yeah, man. I'm a malpractice lawyer, corporate lawyer, court-appointed lawyer, labor lawyer, litigator, prosecutor, process server, barrister, court stenographer, bailiff, I'm Jacoby and Myers, and I help to run the flower shop.
You've got like 15 businesses, so I want to talk a little bit about what are you up to these days? I know you've got Proof. I know you're doing Lizard with Matt. What else are you up to?
Working on a software called Rana Hub. Mm-hmm. I own a chunk of a contact marketing company called Contado. Mm-hmm. They send out gifts to prospective clients on behalf of our clients. I own a chunk of a company called Scorpion Repel.
Yep.
I'm a silent partner in some businesses. I own a chunk of a credit monitoring company, building my real estate portfolio, have a consulting business, have a couple of podcasts.
And why I like ratios. Net profit, it shows 36%, little over 36%. And a lot of accountants in the pest control space might say, hey, these numbers aren't possible. I am here to tell you that these numbers are possible.
Actually using that data, if it looks different, if it looks the same as what Allan is showing here, you're doing some good things.
But your core business, though, is Proof Pest Control.
Yeah.
So how'd you get into this?
So in 2006, I had a buddy that recruited my brother for door-to-door sales, summer sales. Mm-hmm. And he went out there and did really well, just kind of had a knack for it. And he called me up. I just graduated from BYU and said, hey, maybe we should start our own company. You come learn the technician / operation side. Mm-hmm. I'll do the sales. And so I went and worked for a company called Safeguard in Ohio. Yep. And I actually couldn't get along with my brother. We were too immature. We didn't have the funds to, parlay that into a business. And so I ended up going to law school. He ended up sticking with the industry, just stayed in pest control and owned a couple of companies. I ended up practicing law for a while, and then our roads kind of crossed again when he was making an exit. And, I said, hey, maybe we should try again.
Yeah.
Took me a few months to convince him, but that's kind of where it started.
Okay. So you guys started Proof in what year?
So we started working on it in 2014, but our first revenue was spring of 2015.
Okay. And you guys started in Michigan, is that right?
In Detroit, yep.
Okay. And now you're in how many different markets?
So we have 10 branches in 8 states.
Okay. So you guys built this, I guess, kind of the traditional door-to-door route. Is that how you did it?
Yeah, so we started really heavy with door-to-door, but we always had this perspective of, as we grew door-to-door, we wanted the digital marketing aspect of our business and our referrals and our tech sales to outpace door-to-door growth. And in the next few years, it will be more than 50% other sales than door-to-door.
And do you guys use door-to-door to just get into new markets, or are you currently using it and you're kind of legacy markets?
Yeah, so we'll do a little bit of both, but the big part is getting a branch up and going, getting some revenue going, getting some route density. But then we'll strategically move teams around.
Okay.
So if we want to cash flow in a particular branch for whatever reason, then maybe we'll skip a summer and send a team elsewhere as opposed to that branch.
And you know, when you think about, I realize door-to-door is a spectrum. And you know, there's all sorts of sizes, shapes, colors, so to speak, a company's doing this. But when you think about like a plain vanilla door-to-door operation that you greenfield from scratch, how long does it typically take to get cash flow positive?
So I think it really depends. I think the kicker is how many you do the first year.
Okay.
I think that's the trick. So there are some companies that they won't do enough. They'll throw on a few hundred accounts. And then there's some companies that they'll do a branch and they'll put on 5,000-6,000, which can really overwhelm operations, lead to higher attrition, higher costs of goods sold, things like that. So if you're in the 1,500 to 3,000 range year one, you can be profitable if your focus is, if priority number one is profit and not growth, you can be in the black halfway year three.
And when you guys are doing this, are you actually, for the most part, recruiting your own sales guys, or are you using outside services? How do you do that?
So we have, one of our companies is an actual door-to-door marketing company. And so we do almost everything in-house. We have used marketing teams before that we've hired, and we've hired out some of our teams to other companies. But the bulk of it is our own people doing the recruiting and the managing and stuff.
Yeah. We're coming up on 2023. So how many reps will you put on the doors in 2023 roughly?
So in 2023, we're pacing to have probably a couple hundred.
Okay. And those are all recruited out of Utah? Do you recruit out of different areas?
So about half of them will be from Utah, maybe a little less. We've started going to less traditional markets and just using our network in other areas. And we've found that the retention of the door-to-door reps is a little better in those areas because they're not getting hit up by 10, 15 companies.
And you haven't been in this space as long as some of the OGs, right? But you've been at it a while. I mean, what have you seen from a competitive dynamic, particularly in door-to-door pest control, that's taken place from 2014 to present? I'm talking both in terms of compensation, competition actually in markets, right?
It's interesting what's happening with door-to-door, and it's completely different. The last, 5-8 years has just changed because of the demand. So commission rates are a lot higher. Bonuses and incentives, companies are paying a lot more for those. So just generally, door-to-door sales are just costing more money.
Let's talk a little bit about those numbers. Like, for example, I guess when you think about maybe industry averages in 2014 versus 2022.
So, if we're talking about an industry average, so just across the board, you've got to be in the 80s. Now, you're going to have some companies that will have reps off of the proverbial pay scale.
Yep.
Well, where they'll start rookies at 20, 25, 30%. And, as their sales increase, so does their commission retroactively. But what's driving these higher commissions are these marketing teams. So you'll have an individual that can put together a sizable team, and he'll go out and he'll say, okay, I want, if there's a marketing deal, he's going to demand anywhere from 75 to 90, 95%, make his cut off the top, and then pay his reps anywhere to 30 to 50.
How do those numbers work? So if I owned a pest control business and I said, hey, I'm not an LDS guy, I don't know anything about how that works. And I know it's not just LDS guys doing this, I realize that. But that's That's
Sure.
the mainstay, right? That's
Yeah.
part of the culture. And I want to do door to door. I mean, I'm probably going to be paying somewhere between 80% and 100%, somewhere in that range, right? I have a higher marketing team. How do I make those numbers work?
So if you're wanting to hire a marketing team, and I have several people that have hit me up looking for teams for their
Yeah.
pest control companies for 2023. Right now, I'm not finding anything less than 95%, first of all.
Yep.
So to make it work, it really comes down to two things in my mind. Step one is really tough to do with a marketing company, and that is at the time the account is sold, vetting out the customer, going through welcome calls are used a lot to make sure that everyone's on the same page about what the service is, what the agreement is, and what the company's going to do, all of that. Just make sure that people were informed, the new customer was informed exactly as to what's going on. And then this second kicker, which is kind of related to the first, is the retention. So the idea is to get rid of the bad accounts that are going to charge off eventually, get rid of those really quickly. Don't waste resources on those, and get those customers. You got to get them to 18 months. That's my golden standard. If I can get somebody to 14, 16, 18 months, I'm going to keep them unless they move or somebody dies. At Proof, we've realized that we get them. That's our magic number.
And on that topic, though, when you say 14, 16, 18 months, they're effectively out of their first year contract. So they've lived up to their commitment of the first year, and now they're basically month to month, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
They want it. They're paying for it. They could cancel it, but they haven't.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of the operations come into play, like how you're charging your customer. We, over the last couple of years, have moved to monthly billing, where we've, separated the service from the actual billing of it. And I think it really fits with what the economy is doing with monthly subscriptions to pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Right, from Netflix to your car wash.
Yep.
And that's how we like to talk about it with our customers. Think of it like a car wash. Now, we're going to come every quarter or bi-monthly, whatever the service cycle is, but any time in between, we come for free. But obviously, we, impute that into the annual cost. But yeah, after you get them through that first year, and that's why you have about a half of a year where you're really trying to figure out how dedicated they are to you. The interesting thing about pest control, Paul, is that we're not a sexy business. We're not a business that people want to think about, right? We're not selling designer shoes where people want to just look at pictures of bugs all day. Our job is best done when people don't think about us at all. And so as a company, after that first year, they can kind of drift into the background and just become something that they see on their monthly statement, but they don't think much about. That's the real hook to get into that, long-term retention.
For a lot of folks out there, when you and I say 95%, I think people are saying, well, what are these guys talking about? So I want to talk about that for a minute. So, a lot of the door-to-door firms that I've dealt with historically tend to have their own teams, right? And sometimes they'll hire out an outside firm, but for the most part, they do the recruiting, they have their own internal sales arm. And there's a variety of different ways to pay sales reps. And things have really, I think, evolved over time from the standpoint of sometimes there were one or two specific back-end payments. Sometimes, now we're seeing a big movement to spreading back-ends out over multiple times, moving overrides further on in the future. So when you talk about 95%, if I, again, going back to the example of me running a pest control company, I want to hire a door-to-door team. I get XYZ marketing, they come in. When I'm paying somebody 95%, that means I'm paying that marketing firm 95% of the first year contract value. And when am I making those payments?
So when you're negotiating a marketing deal, there's a couple of different pieces that you can move around. But the PCO is not in control. and they need to know that. And the reason is just simply the demand. So if I'm talking about 95%, that's not crazy high. It sounds high, but that means I'm going to lose on negotiating terms. So if I'm paying 95%, a lot of marketing companies are going to require, at the time of service, the first service, they're going to require upwards of 50% right then. And some marketing firms will not allow any of that 50% to be clawed back. And then, there will probably be one back end, probably in the fall. But by the end of the year, for a marketing firm, that's paid in full, and it's said and done regardless of what ends up happening with the customer.
So you're saying, like, I hire a marketing company. They go out in June, they pull on one customer. And for simplicity's sake, it's a $400 a year account.
Okay.
So I'm probably writing a check for roughly $200, give or take. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. And then the back end payment is typically due in the fall or the winter. Are there oftentimes contingencies based on whether or not that customer takes a service or two services or no?
Yeah, so again, that goes back to the terms, but you definitely want to have something in there where whenever that last back end check is, from the PCO's perspective, they want to make sure that a couple of things are in place. One, that the customer is still active. Two, the customer has received regular paid services, whatever that is, bi-monthly, monthly, quarterly, during that entire time.
Yep.
And that they've paid for them. So those are the big three pieces where, and I wouldn't budge. That's one thing that as a PCO, I wouldn't budge on. If they're not active, if they haven't paid for a certain number of services, then I'm gonna charge that one back.
When I think back to, it probably wasn't until maybe 2010-ish that I even knew what summer sales or door-to-door was, right? And I'd been in the pest control industry since 2003, and I was always dealing with the traditional companies. And then I started to notice like some of these OGs with these old Moxie-style Safeguard, all those old school companies. But when I think back almost 20 years ago, of course, apartments were dramatically cheaper, right? The commission rates, you didn't have to pay sign-on bonuses back then. And I remember these reps, 10%, 12%, 15%. And now it seems like, in some of these companies, reps are getting paid north of 50%. So at what point do you think we're going to start to hit the ceiling as far as what reps can actually continue to extract out of pest control companies? Because at some point the math doesn't work, right? It doesn't.
I honestly think we're really close in terms of commissions. In terms of what they can expect financially,
Yeah.
I think we're getting close. The terms and how you can move stuff around, I think is still up for debate. I think maybe larger signing bonuses, pay-go has become a little more popular, where they can, collect for years, as long as the customer's active. But I don't see companies getting much over 100%. And I think that's why is that if you want to run a profitable business, but this is the other kicker, is it really depends on the end game. Because a lot of the door-to-door companies get in this catch-22 because they say, hey, I'm going to build my company real fast. I'm going to use it almost exclusively door-to-door, and then I'm going to sell my company. But I always say the best way to build a company to sell is to build a company not to sell.
Correct.
So because of that, I think we're getting really near the top, and people are just going to be creative with incentives, cars, upfront bonuses, larger apartments, things like that.
I got to wonder where, when I think about asset price inflation over the last decade and acutely in the last 5 years, we've seen, valuations for both traditional as well as door-to-door companies really go off the charts, and we're in a different regime now, right? So valuation multiples have begun to contract in earnest here in 2022, and I think that will continue. I mean, it'll be very interesting to me if 2 years from now, any company that was recently built up on the doors now garners a revenue multiple of 70%, right? So I would have to imagine that'll put this commission inflation in heavy reverse. I think in a lot of ways, guys have looked and said, okay, valuations are super high. I can spend 5 years, I can build this up, I can kind of scale off the doors, I can sell it for a pretty hefty premium. When that goes away, I would imagine that has downward pressure on commissions, I would think.
So I think it will to some extent. What's going to balance that out, in my opinion, is the traditional PCOs and PCCs that are catching on to door-to-door. Mm-hmm. I think that they're going to continue to look for marketing arrangements that will push the demand or keep it steady. So I think there will be a little bit of attrition with those rates, but I don't think it will be too crazy because of this newer segment of PCOs that are coming in. These owners that haven't really done door to door. I notice just them reaching out to me in large quantities because they see the flash. The problem is when I talk to them about it, door to door obviously has a good and bad side to it. Mm-hmm. It's not all rainbows and sunshine. And a lot of them don't understand how it will affect their operations. In some cases, it could absolutely crush them. They'll lose people because, their technicians will go service the account and hear what door-to-door sales reps are saying to customers that they'll do. And so, but putting all those things kind of in perspective, I think there will be a balancing of some sort, type of correction. Mm-hmm. I don't see it being drastic because I think that demand is going to hold fairly steady.
Do you use door-to-door because you feel like you get a better return on the door-to-door investment versus digital, for example? Or do you see a day when Proof is not on the doors at all?
My return on door-to-door accounts is actually lower. It's about 20% lower, and my attrition is higher. So we use door-to-door as an opening strategy for a new branch, and for two other reasons. One is for market penetration, route density, mm-hmm. and the other is we are literally choosing our customers.
Yeah.
So we get to control the demographic. Yeah. And we use it as a pace setter for the marketing that comes behind the door-to-door. So it's really, we're still able to get our branches in the black with door-to-door, but it's really a pace setter for the marketing that comes behind it.
It appears you're putting a lot of time, money, and effort into building Lizard. I know we're going to talk in a few minutes. We're going to bring Matt in here and we're going to have a chat. But I guess with regard to Lizard, you clearly see the importance of having digital marketing capabilities. And you being kind of an old school door-to-door guy, why are you doing this?
So there's a lot of reasons why pest control companies should use, a variety of marketing techniques, mm-hmm. but especially digital marketing. The flip side of door-to-door is, I'm getting my customers for a lot less. I'm getting leads for a lot less. My cost per customer acquisition is, in some cases, half. And, we've just believed that there's that opportunity there. Now with pest control, I love this industry for a lot of reasons. And every year I'm in it, I love it more. But one of the reasons is there's a really low barrier to entry. Mm-hmm. You don't need a professional degree. Yeah. You don't need several $1 million of startup capital. That's the good part. The bad part is a lot of times people will hang a shingle, borrow a truck or just use what they've got, and they're not very sophisticated. And so with Lizard, we decided to kind of come in and help those companies add this dimension to their, their pest control operations. When they don't necessarily understand it that much, it can be very daunting for some PCOs. And it's something that we know, and it's exciting. I like helping build pest control companies, whether they're mine or somebody else's. I just have a passion for it. And this is, Lizard was just the next step in that.
Are you then using Lizard to assist Proof with really boning up those specific capabilities? How does Proof, your pest control business, work with Lizard SEM?
So Proof is just a client of Lizard SEM. Yeah. Besides that, there's no shared information or anything like that. There's no employees that work on both sides. So it's literally just another client.
And your focus with Lizard has been, is it exclusively pest control?
We do have some other clients. I actually own a law firm, and so my law firm uses Lizard, and so we have a couple of more closely held companies that uses Lizard, but the nuts and bolts of Lizard is pest control. It's what we know. I think there's going to be a day where we branch out, especially into other home services, pool cleaning, landscaping, window washing. But that's what we know right now, and that's what we're really good at. So we're just riding this train for as long as we can right now.
That's great. So Allan, you're an attorney, you still own a law firm. You've got Lizard, you have, of course, Proof and a variety of other things. But what's your aspirations with Proof? And where do you think you're going to take that business?
We've always wanted to be a household nationwide name. And it started as a family company, and in a lot of ways it still is. So we're just enjoying the ride. We're scaling quite quickly. We average 1 to 2 branches that we add a year, and we're picking up pace. So, we don't really ever plan on selling. It's more of a, let's build it. Let's create some really great jobs for people. And I mean, for me, while I'm not stepping away necessarily, but I'm spending less time with Proof. And for me, it's always going to be, like my child, right? Once they grow up and they leave the house, you're still a parent.
They become their own person though, right?
Exactly. And one of them, actually, that you mentioned that, one of my proudest moments with Proof is when I can go in and I can see other people's thumbprint on it. I'll see a new design, or I'll see we're using some new products, or we have a new service method. And that's really how I try to lead, because Proof isn't just for me or for the owners. But I think, I have no reason to sell it. Now, I don't know if a life event is going to happen with me or one of the other owners.
Yeah.
I don't know, but there's, I feel like we've done a good job with the logistics of it on the operations side, and paired it with this combination of some pretty fierce marketing and scaling. And so we're just learning where it's going to take us and adapting to market change and going from there.
How active are you in that business nowadays?
So I'm active at, a 30,000 foot level. So I won't really get into a lot of the details anymore. I've surrounded myself with really talented people that have, more than a decade more of industry experience than I have. I have a really great operator. And so my involvement is mostly new branches, upper level management hires, and, just the future and the vision of Proof.
Yep.
I'm reviewing financial statements every month, and I'm on that level with it. But
so let's break it down to hours per week where you're actually putting mental energy into Proof. And I know that's hard because it's seasonal, like
5-minute text here. It's yep.
I get it.
And it obviously changes, but throughout the year, I would probably say less than 20. But I just went on a trip, for a week with Proof people, so that was around the clock pretty much.
Yeah.
But so there will be some weeks where it's less than 5.
No intent to sell this business. You're going to continue to scale it. You're going to continue to build out the organization and the infrastructure, hopefully taking less and less active role as time goes on. And then where do you think you'll focus your time mostly from an entrepreneurial perspective?
I'm really getting into becoming an angel investor. So I'm trying to find more startup companies, specifically seed round type companies, and get in early with them. Maybe help them with a few things just to get off the ground, and then backing away because my time is very limited, and just getting into more passive roles. So that's how I see the next 40 years of my life, just moving into more of an angel investment.
And what sort of startups? Any particular areas or industries?
So I love home services. I love I love marketing, but I'm open. I have some really different investments right now, and but home services, service type companies those are the ones that I understand and know. But I like variety. I like getting out of my comfort zone, having somebody explain something to me that I don't have experience with, and learning. And obviously there's more risk in doing that, doing something I don't understand. A lot of people would tell me not to do it, but you could pitch me an ice cream shop and I would listen.
Yeah. Well, after this discussion, you'll probably get some calls on some ice cream shops. That's usually how it works. Especially down here in Puerto Rico, they actually are great businesses, to be honest with you, here in Old San Juan. So you've got Proof, you've got Lizard, you mentioned a credit monitoring business. Let's talk about that for a second. A little bit obscure.
Yeah, so a little different. My brother Brent makes great connections on the golf course, and he has a buddy that he acquired this credit monitoring company, and this buddy had already built and sold one before. And this was just over the last couple of months. And after playing enough golf with this friend, my brother convinced him to let us buy in. He wasn't raising money. And so we said, fine, you guys can buy in. And so we bought, a little chunk of it. We're purely silent partners. He's going to build it and sell it in the next 3 to 5 years. And we're just going to see what happens.
Allan, it's not often that I get door-to-door guys down here in Puerto Rico. And, I've always kind of giggled inside with regard to how, the traditional side of the business deals with door-to-door and vice versa, right? The majority of our clients are traditional pest control businesses that don't do door-to-door because that's the majority of the market. But, over the last decade, the number of door-to-door companies has increased and so on and so forth. So we do a ton of that. There seems to be, for a lot of traditional companies, somewhat of an animosity towards door-to-door. These guys on the Segways are douchebags. These guys try to steal our customers. And there's a certain truth to this, right?
Yes.
Because there's definitely a lot of douchebags, and they do try to, and some of these companies do bend the truth a little bit, right?
Yes.
But what's your philosophy when you think about trying to build your business? How do you deal with that sort of stuff? How do you train these reps to actually do the right thing?
It's very, very difficult because they're out there unmonitored, on their own. They're 100% commission.
Get a direct incentive to make that sale, right? At all costs, right?
And so a lot of it just comes back to making sure that they understand the program, making sure they understand, hey, these, you only get paid on these accounts if you retain them for a certain amount of time, and reminding them of that, because you'll hear door-to-door reps say, hey, we'll clean your gutters, you trim your trees, shovel your sidewalk, you can cancel at any time. And reps that know that they can't cancel, and if they do, they have to, pay a cancellation fee or whatever. But it's very difficult. And you bring up a really good point and there is a lot of animosity in the industry about it. And I understand it from both sides. I understand that there are a lot of really good door-to-door reps out there that are honest and they're working hard. And here's the kicker is that a lot of times the more traditional companies will get business because the door-to-door reps will be canvassing a certain area and people will think, oh, I guess I do need pest control, and they won't buy from the door-to-door rep because they're not that type of individual.
Yep.
And then they'll start, doing looking
research.
online or whatever, asking in a Facebook group for a referral, whatever. So, but there is this issue that's out there, and I've heard a lot of complaining, and I've heard a lot of people say, I can't stand the door-to-door pest control companies. They're not even real pest control companies.
Yep.
And I think those of us that do door-to-door and that are involved in it, we owe a little bit of duty to, at least within our circle of control, to make sure that a lot of that stuff's not happening. I can't stand when one of my door-to-door guys is trying to switch over a customer and just starts bad-mouthing another company. But it really comes down to leadership. And there's some companies out there, Paul, that they don't care.
Yeah.
They actually encourage it. I've seen companies that you bring me an invoice from XYZ company and I'm going to double your commission. And so a lot of it just comes back to the culture and the leadership not encouraging it, but it's out there, it's prevalent, and some people frankly don't care. They like being, the bad boys of pest control.
Yeah. In my line of business, which is far more narrow than yours, I have one job. You got like 15 jobs. I got one. In my line of business, though, I don't think there's one business day of the year that goes by where I don't get a call from somebody who's in the door-to-door space, and the question is usually pretty simple. Paul, I've got an office here, here, and here. I'm going to add a fourth office. Where should I go from a desirability perspective when it comes to ultimately selling that business? And I often don't have, sometimes I'll have opinions on places not to go, but I often don't. That's very subjective. And I've noticed in talking to some of these guys over the years that more and more now the actual reps are having influence on where to go. Like, hey, go to Michigan. I don't want to go to Michigan. It's too picked over. I want to go someplace else, right? So how often do you see that now with door-to-door rep teams?
That's huge. So we'll open an office that is desirable from a door-to-door standpoint, like a place where reps see themselves hanging out on the weekend or, doing activities that, we wouldn't normally open. We have to make sure that the demographics are there. But for us, if the city's large enough for us, the disposable income and home ownership rates are high enough, we'll make a decision based off of the cooler city. Yeah. Not necessarily a Midwest, but maybe a New York, something close to New York or Boston, or because that does come into play. And even if you have multiple branches, when you're talking to a specific door-to-door rep, you start to step on people's toes because they don't all own all of the branches, but they'll say, hey, I don't want to go to Reno, Nevada, right? We have a branch in Reno. I may not want to go to Reno. It's not as sexy as going to New York or Boston or something else. And that really comes into play quite a bit. The truth is, we definitely have preferences for where we open branches, but at this stage, for our model, we think that we could go anywhere and be successful.
In 2013, I would go to Austin or Dallas or any city, and you had door-to-door companies, but a small amount. Now I feel like a lot of the major areas, the major kind of urban centers, are extremely picked over. If you go to Austin, Texas, there has to be at least 30 door-to-door companies there, right? So, at what point is the market so saturated? And I have no opinion on this. I'm curious what you think. Is there a saturation point?
So there's this idea that within the door-to-door industry, especially with certain larger companies, that they dominate. They get to decide where they go, and they'll bring in 30, 60 people, and it doesn't matter. But it does. It does to them, and it does to everybody else. You know, and without getting into too much detail about our market selection, it's a consideration. We look at what teams are where, because there are markets like that, like Austin, that are getting saturated, Southern California, parts of Florida, and that's a top 4 or 5 consideration for us. Is, are we going to be able to go canvas certain neighborhoods that we want to target without always being behind somebody else?
What are other considerations?
I mean, number one for us is going to be how large of a company could that city support? So we like larger cities, because we like to make sure that the ceiling's high enough for what we're after. I mentioned a couple of other before. Home ownership is really big for us. Disposable income, because we're going after a certain demographic. And
what is that demographic?
Our demographic is 55 to 60-year-old physician or attorney that owns a home in the suburbs, that has lived there for 5 or 10 years, that drives a luxury vehicle, that is busy enough that doesn't worry about what they're paying for pest control. They just want somebody else to take care of it.
Yep. I guess the last question that I have for you is, you've been quite busy over the years. I mean, what are some of the most important lessons you think you've learned that would be helpful to guys that are relatively early on in this whole pest control ownership and management journey? You've had to have made a lot of mistakes.
So honestly, I think that's the biggest one, is looking at what the journey is molding the owner into. Because I don't believe that companies are able to reach a status that the owner or the leadership team is not at. And a lot of times people will go into a business and they feel like they have to have all the answers and they can never be wrong. But if I could rewind time, I would probably add a little dose of humility to those first few years and even now, so that my learning curve was a little steeper, so that I could, as opposed to just shrugging things off, realize, hey man, I don't understand this well enough. I need to surround myself with people that are better than me. But I think when we're early, we feel like we have something to prove. And so it's more difficult.
Yeah.
But if the sooner you're able to do that and realize that it's not about you, you think it is, it's not. It's about the people that you bring along for the ride. And you start to attract really talented people that have really lofty goals and really, large visions or whatever for what they want to achieve. There's so much success that just naturally flows from that. So, for those early entrepreneurs, just getting into that mindset that, hey, I'm an entrepreneur because I'm not afraid to make mistakes, and I'm not afraid to admit them, and I'm not afraid to learn from them. It's just going to push it along a lot quicker.
But what you say holds a lot of truth. It's like the more mature and experienced we get in business, the easier it is to admit that we're wrong, right? Like in the early years, you don't want to admit that, right?
Yeah.
So, well, Allan, I really appreciate you coming down to San Juan. It's been a fantastic discussion. I look forward to chatting with you and Matt today here on Potomac TV.
Appreciate it.
That's a wrap.
Let me tell you something, young Rasta boy. When I was your age, I was a maintenance man, a carpenter, a cab driver, a cook, a hospital orderly, a security guard, a tour guide, a fish cleaner, and an Amway distributor all in the same day.